cost-effective supply of the right products is a key ingredient. So, as we talk about all of these dynamics, there's no one person that's more important than anyone else. It's everybody who's part of our sector, all of you who are in the room, who have a key role to play in making this market transformation good for business, which then has flow-on effects to be good for society, more of a society that we want, and then good for the environment, which is what some people are driven by. But I think the decision makers in this room, if you continue to be focused on what's good for business and the flow-on effects, that's okay for us as well. Now, the only way that this is really going to work to have a business focus is to have a common language, is to have some sort of way of defining what it is we're talking about with green building. So let's just take a look at regulation. I understand that there is some regulation in Panama. I understand there's some in Mexico, and I hear that there's a lot of challenges around enforcing some of these regulations. But most people build at least to regulation, whatever standard that's at. So I would say that about 70% of buildings are somewhere in that just above regulation phase. Then what the Green Building Council's role is to create a standard above code which is voluntary. So then everyone can be talking about the same thing. In Panama you use LEED. In other parts of the world you use Green Star, BREEAM in Europe. There are actually about 200 different rating systems around the world. There are about 5 or 6 that are more widely used than others. But what this benchmark does, the voluntary benchmark that defines green, is it enables you to work out the economics. It enables you to set a price on how green you want to be. And so then it also enables everyone who's part of the project team, because we have that complicated value chain of people that are involved, to aim for that goal. So everyone's very aware of the credits and the technical detail that they have a role in playing to meet that target. Then we know that it can be on-sold, that has some credibility, and that value associated with reaching beyond code actually can mean something. There are some people that go way beyond that and they take big risks. You see some LEED platinum buildings that some people think are beyond reach. But once those LEED platinum buildings, those really high-end, edgy type of buildings, actually get built in a market, and people realise that maybe it didn't cost the 20% extra cost you thought it was. Maybe it was only 6%. And maybe the value of that can be really easily understood and paid back for the time frame that you're comfortable with. So I think that type of distribution changes quite rapidly depending on how fast the market adapts. The premise of the Green Building Council and the market-driven agenda that we have is that over time this will happen. Is that the market will slowly change, and what we're talking about as being leading edge today will be normal practice tomorrow. And so in reality, we will keep increasing the standards, but it will bring up the industry standard overall. And it will do this with carrots and rewards. And ideally, government come behind and push up the bottom end with the stick. Because I think that combination of the stick, or the slightly heavy hand from government, and then the reward and the carrot at the front end is the fastest way to transform the market. I think the other thing that's important is in the early days of this market transformation journey, we shouldn't expect government to really come in with any sticks at the bottom. If we show that this is a positive agenda, that it's good for business, that it's good for society, and it's good for the environment, and we make money out of it, then government can come in behind relatively softly. It makes sense. They're only doing what we want as an industry. So I think at the moment, if we keep this a positive agenda, and I know there's some people from government in the room, I don't think there's a big ask from you right now except to walk hand in hand with us. Showed this before. This is a vital ingredient to this market transformation, is to have this communication tool and this purchasing tool. Without some way to define green, none of this will really work. So I think it's great that the conversation around how you define green is fairly simple here. pretty much everyone uses LEED. I guess the question in the future will be, what about residential? Is the LEED for homes going to meet your requirements here in Panama? But that's a conversation you can have in a couple of years with at least 50% of all the new office buildings and apartment buildings are LEED anyway. So we'll talk about that next time. This model that I'm talking about has made massive impacts in some countries. In Australia, this is from 2006 to 2010, this was the amount of change that you saw in the office market. So this is just office buildings, so it's kind of around the other way from what I had. This end is premium A-grade buildings, and it started off being the green buildings were the top ends of buildings. But after 4 years, it was going right down to upgrade of existing buildings and buildings that were outside the CBD, industrial buildings, and B-grade buildings, not the top-end buildings, because investors were seeing that without having a green certification, it was actually putting their building at risk. So any new building that was built within that range was starting to be built green within 4 years with virtually no government incentives. Government have come in behind and have some mandatory disclosure requirements and performance of buildings and have some incentives now, but that amount of transformation happened pretty much through market drivers. I think the other thing that's important, and probably the question that's asked most of me, is how much more does it cost? So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the crucial ingredient of the business case and getting it right. So we've got the big picture. We know that this market transformation journey is happening in 89 countries around the world. We have green building councils driving this momentum of bringing people together. But the business case is different in every country because you pay different prices for your materials, you pay different fees to your architects and engineers and everyone who's involved. So I'm just going to show you some business case information from other countries, and I know it's going to be a priority for the Green Building Council and for you to get involved with this to really figure out what are the numbers here. So those projects that we talked about that are going through LEED certification, if any of those are your projects and you can somehow disclose any of the type of information you see, it will be critical to making sure that this transformation process speeds up. So a bunch of reports, you see them on the far side, that have been done quite recently in the US. They look at rental premium, sale price premium, and occupancy premium. You see there's a massive variation from report to report. They do different cities in different countries. They have a different number of buildings, but the overall consensus from all of these, so you can see Energy Star, which is purely an energy rating, and LEED, which is a much more holistic overall building rating. It's got a combination of the two, and if it's just one number added up, it's both of them, so there's no difference. But the overall consensus is that in all of these areas, there's a premium for green building. I think this has been a question for a long time, and it's not until you've got a significant number of green buildings with the data that you can actually produce numbers like this and have this information. But I think what is helpful about seeing this in the US and a number of different studies is we transfer that to our own marketplaces and we go, is that about right for us? Because at the moment, while there are no significant numbers here, you can only guess. And I know that focusing on gathering that data is a huge priority. Let's have a look at Australia. There's a recent report that came out, it was commissioned by the Australian Property Institute it came out this year. It found the Green Star rating system was a 12% increase in sale price overall. That's much bigger than I think what was expected. There was a 5% higher rent premium for any green certified building under the Green Star system. And they found that buildings that weren't certified either under Green Star or the energy rating, kind of like Energy Star that they have, major discounts were needed to actually lease them. So the leasing agents were having to, and the owner were having to suffer quite badly on major discounts because they couldn't lease them and they had long lead-in times to that lease. The other interesting one that's come out this year is a report from PwC and ULI, which is closer to home again in the US. They surveyed 600 real estate experts. So this is more from the tenant demand side rather than the developer or professional side. They found that green building in this survey was green buildings were accounting for about 2% of the market. So a very small percentage actually of the overall market. They found that tenants are looking now, this is 2011, to cut their operational costs. It's a key driver in every business at the moment to cut OpEx costs. I know that many of the tenants can't get out of the leases that they're currently in, but this is what they're saying they want to do as soon as they can get out of those leases. So the demand for green building, these 600 people say, is going to increase as soon as many of these leases come up. They found that the tenants that have some sort of corporate social responsibility agenda, these were the ones that were most aware of the opportunities that existed for green building, and it had flow-on impacts to their business, like productivity gains. Many of the studies show that this can be up to 10% of productivity for the company that occupies a green building. They also found that there was an advantage in attracting talent. So the best people were wanting to work in green buildings, and in interviews they were asking whether the building was a green building. The evidence is also showing that these tenants are willing to pay more. Now, as far as I'm aware, this is the only study that's actually evidenced the fact that tenants are willing to pay more. In many countries, tenants say they're not willing to pay more, but they still want the benefits. And this is a bit of a challenge, I think, because there's a bit of a split incentive. Do we expect the developers to put a little bit more upfront cost and not be able to increase the rental premium? Is this just an expectation now to make sure that they can sell the building in the future? I know many buildings in part of the world that I'm from, down Australia, New Zealand, you cannot sell if you don't have a green rating. So whether that's what the future is, or whether the developers are going to be able to, or investors are going to be able to get that sort of balance in the short term, I think it's going to be a juggle until there's real momentum in the industry. So that's the kind of latest information on the business case. And the impact that it's having on policy in countries like America is that you see the increase in numbers of policies here. That is quite significant recently. So it means that if the business case is there, the momentum is there, people are predicting an increase in demand for green building, then the governments can come in behind and basically mandate the use of LEED for particular zones or particular office buildings that they might be building or wanting to occupy. So that's a massive variation in types of policies, but it just shows you the trend. Once the business case is there, once the numbers are starting to increase, government can follow with good policy. Doesn't mean that there's not challenges. So I think we might talk about the good side of things in the US and the market transformation that's occurred. There's still many challenges. I think the cost of cheap building is still, a key way that we approach building. How can we invest least to get the most return? And I think what's starting to change, and actually tonight I fly to Washington to go to a United Nations Finance Initiative meeting, which is with the bankers and the investors. And what they're starting to say is if they're not looking at the risk associated with climate change and with the long-term investment associated with a building, then they might get stuck with an obsolete asset. So they're looking at what is the risk profile for them, and what are the impacts, the social impacts that a building has on society, and what are the resources that are involved to get there. How far do people have to drive? Are there public transport links to the building? So I think these types of things of lowest cost, cheap development are now starting to be traded off and looked at in a different light, especially with the economic situation that's going. I think that there was a quote from, I can't even remember who said it, but it was that you can never miss a good recession. And I think the opportunity that happens in a recession is that we're not comfortable doing business the way we've done before. And so we see that this is actually an opportunity to rethink our business model and improve it. And that is what's going on, especially in the investment community, whereas I don't think they needed to before because they were quite comfortable, thank you very much, making lots of money. I think the other challenge from an investment perspective is that until someone's been through a sustainability or a green building project, they actually want it to outperform